Hello, and welcome to the place where we talk about the idols on the hill. I'm Phil, and I'll be your host. In our last segment, we explained that it's possible to understand and to enjoy God. We also talked about things that get in the way of doing that. We called those things idols. In this segment, we're going to continue this concept by introducing an important principle, the principle of connections. In order to understand connections, let's start with a little trivia game. I'm going to ask the question, where do cars come from? Some would say that's easy, the car factory. And that would be a correct short-term answer. Others would go a little further back and think of names like Henry Ford. Now that would be a partially correct answer. He invented a way of mass-producing cars in such a way that lots of people could afford them. Let me jump in at this point before we work our brains too hard and give you an answer to this question that goes way back. An answer that would surprise many people. Cars, you see, come from bells. Cars come from bells? Yes, bells. Centuries ago, someone figured out how to take molten metal and pour it into a cast to make bells. As the bells got bigger and bigger, they needed more and more metal. The more metal, the stronger the bell. Now, someone else came along and figured out that you can use bells for other purposes. If you turn a bell on its side and put gunpowder into the cavity, you can make heavy objects fly out the end. And hence, the cannon was born. Later, someone came along and figured out how to put cannons to work other than shooting at people. They added a piston, and the piston engine was born. The engines started out large, but got smaller. Eventually, a man named Carl Benz figured out how to put a piston engine into a carriage. Before that time, carriages needed a horse to pull them. Benz figured out how to make a horseless carriage, which later got shortened to just car. Mr. Benz sounds familiar because of his association with Mercedes-Benz. So we start with bells, which connect to cannons, which connect to piston engines, which connect to cars. I borrowed this particular set of connections from a fascinating television series created by a man named James Burke. He called his show Connections. In that series, Mr. Burke demonstrates all kinds of connections between old technologies of days past and new technologies of today. Now, as interesting as all of this sounds, maybe it's not that practical. You can drive a car without having any idea who invented it or where it came from. Some connections, though, are vital. We'll call these spiritual connections. To understand these, let me tell you a story. In America, we have many homes with children. These children go to school during school time, but in the summer, school lets out. And when school lets out, many children find themselves with what some call unstructured time. Unstructured time can be used to get into mischief, so families often look for a way to fill that time. I have a friend who's happy to help out. She sponsors something called a Bible Club. In a Bible Club, children get together and hear stories about the Bible. At one of these meetings, a little girl came who was very polite, but very quiet. After sitting through several days of Bible Club without saying anything, she finally raised her hand with a question. And here was her question. Who is this God guy that you're all talking about? Wow, who is this God guy? This is something very surprising. If children grow up in a religious home, sooner or later their parents take them to a place of worship where they hear about God. On the other hand, some families are atheistic. They don't believe in God. But in those cases, parents often warn their children about their superstitious neighbors who want to talk to them about what the parents would consider silly notions about something called God. In either case, children hear about God. Here's something new. A child who had never heard about God, not as a fundamental assumption of life, or even something to be avoided. No parent, no friend, no teacher no one mentioned God in the presence of this child. Now, this might make atheists happy. They've been working a long time to create a world like this. For people who believe in God, though, this is a sad moment. Not a hopeless moment, mind you. Remember, this was a Bible club. The child heard all about God from that point on. Sorry, atheists. But you know something? This story that I'm telling you didn't take place yesterday. Didn't take place a year ago. It took place in 1992. And it's particularly surprising considering that America was founded by people like the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims came to our shores almost 400 years ago with a vision of making America into a religious paradise. Fast forward to today, and we hear stories that are just troubling. In 2006, a photographer in New Mexico was asked to photograph a lesbian commitment ceremony. She refused, stating that her religious faith prevented her from participating in such an event. The lesbian couple filed a complaint with the New Mexico Human Rights Commission and won a judgment of $7,000. That judgment was upheld by the state Supreme Court of New Mexico. Again, advance a few years to 2014, and we hear about a man named Brendan Eich, who was forced to step down from his position as CEO of a major software company named Mozilla. He was forced to step down because he made a contribution to a political effort to prevent gay marriage from becoming legal in California. Now, I want to state my personal belief that no one in a free society should be in danger from others because of their sexual practices. You will look long and hard for the passage in the Bible where it says, "And Jesus and his followers waited outside the gay bar and fell upon all those who came out." It's just not in there. So we're not saying this to try to gin up anger against gay people. Having said this, though, I think it's fair to say that homosexual marriage is something the Pilgrims wouldn't approve of. So how did America, a place founded by people like the Pilgrims, become a place where people can be punished for refusing to endorse homosexual activities, punished by lawsuits and dismissal from their jobs? And how did America, a place intended to be a religious paradise, become a place where some children never even hear about God? I often hear people ask that question. How did this happen? How did this happen? The people who ask it always act as though it's a mystery. Can I tell you something? Actually, it's no mystery at all. I can tell you exactly how it happened. In order to understand this, and in particular, if you have a desire to see people of faith influencing the world like the Pilgrims did centuries ago, we need to see some connections. In particular, we need to see three kinds of connections. Think of these three types of connections as though you're looking around a room in different directions. First, we need to look back. We need to see historical connections. We need to see the series of events and decisions that led the America that was founded by the Pilgrims down the path to where it is today. In fact, we need to look further back than the Pilgrims. Next, we need to look up, vertically. We need to see personal, spiritual connections. Earlier we spoke of enjoying God. Most people don't know how to do that. We need to learn how to connect with our Creator. Finally, we need to look around us, horizontally. We need to see what I will call spiritual life connections. I often see people attend worship services who appear to be having a deep spiritual experience. Sadly, I often see the same people go out into the world and lead a life that is very different than what you would think based on what you see in the house of worship. Their life in worship and their life outside don't appear to connect. In our series, we're going to talk about all of these different types of connections. I hope you'll continue to visit. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube and you like what you see, you can hit the subscribe button, or you can like us on Facebook. Connections are just one of the topics that we'll be discussing as we talk about the idols on the hill.